It's time to sit back, relax, and listen to Conversations with Joan. Conversations with Joan will inspire, motivate, and empower you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. And now, here's your host, Joan Herman.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life's Conversations with Joan. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. Conversations with Joan focuses on topics that are important to your life, from health and wellness to professional development to personal well-being. Change makers join me to share their insights, tips, and strategies so you can thrive and live your best life now. Thank you for taking time for yourself, and thank you for letting us be a part of your life. Now, let's start talking. Hearing the word you have cancer is a major fear for many people. A cancer diagnosis is shocking and scary. With so many questions, it's often difficult to know what to do. Today's guest, Dr. Chadi Nabhan, has decades of experience treating oncology patients. He joins us to demystify this complex disease and to offer a compassionate guide to understanding a cancer diagnosis and treatment options. Dr. Nabhan is a board-certified hematologist and a medical oncologist. He's the creator and host of the weekly Healthcare Unfiltered podcast and author of the book, The Cancer Journey, Understanding Diagnosis, Treatment, Recovery, and Prevention. Welcome, Dr. Nabhan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, John. I appreciate the opportunity.
Doctor, when a person is first given a diagnosis of cancer, from your experience in working with all of these patients, what usually goes through that person's mind? What are some of their biggest fears?
I think, to put it lightly, the world actually crumbles in front of their eyes. I mean, that's really the reality of things, because the most important thing, the most precious thing that we all have in life is our health. And any kind of health scares would really throw us off balance. So imagine you're being told a diagnosis of a disease that many people assume that's it, it's the end. I have cancer. It means I'm just not going to survive. I'm not going to make it. What goes through their minds is that, is this it? What's going to happen to me, my family, my kids, my parents, depending where you are in the life journey? And what am I going to go through? Am I going to suffer with treatment? Am I going to be cured? Is there a chance I can get rid of it? And there are a couple other things that sometimes go through people's mind because, look, we're humans. It's normal. Did I do anything that made me develop this cancer? Is there something I could have done to prevent this cancer from happening? All of these things, all of these emotions happen at the same time as when the person hears that word. We always feel we're invincible as a human being until we're not. It's fascinating. You know, I've been cared for people for decades. It's just the human nature. You always think it's going to happen to your next door neighbor, to your friend, to your relative. You never really feel that it's going to happen to you, especially if you take care of yourself and you've done a good job in terms of avoiding any potential compounds that could cause problems. So when it happens, you start doubting all of these things. So all of these emotions happen, and unfortunately, regardless of these emotions, you have to put all of these things aside because you have to have a plan and to proceed forward. That's really why it's so challenging when you hear this word.
And like you just said, we always think it's going to happen to someone else. So let's try to understand cancer a bit. What is it? How does it develop? And why does it hit some people and not others?
Very good question. So cancer is overgrowth of cells in an uncontrollable manner in a particular organ. So any organ that we have in our body is composed of cells. And these cells usually have a very harmonized way of actually living and dying and then being replaced by other cells that replace the dying cells. Something happens that tips this balance. So the cells continue to grow and they do not die naturally. That overgrowth of cells that continues to occur could become cancerous or malignant, because some tumors could be benign, but it's really overgrowth of cells. Mm-hmm. And because we have various organs and all of these organs are composed of cells, these cancers differ. So if you have overgrowth of cells in the ovarian tissue, that could lead to ovarian cancer, which is different than prostate cancer when you have overgrowth of cells in the prostate tissue, different than breast cancer, different than colon cancer. So that is what cancer is. At its core, it is overgrowth of cells in an uncontrollable fashion. So the balance between cell survival and cell death is not really any more appropriate. Now, why does this occur? At the end of the day, the reason it occurs because there's some mutations or something occurs on the DNA level, on the molecular level of these cells that lead them to start growing in an uncontrollable way. Sometimes we do not know what leads to this DNA damage and this overgrowth of cells. Sometimes we do. So there are certain things that we know they are associated or they could cause cancers. Examples of this, obviously, everybody talks about, tobacco smoking. We all know it causes certain cancers, not all cancers, of course. Alcohol use, excessive alcohol use is also a carcinogen. There are certain viruses that are associated and could cause cancers. Pesticides and herbicides, some of them are linked to particular cancers. In fact, my first book called Toxic Exposure talks about the link between Roundup, which is an herbicide used as a weed killer, and its link to non-Hodgkin lymphoma, which is a form of cancer. So hopefully this really explains how this happens. Unfortunately, there are times we just don't know, right? I wish we had the answers to all of the reasons, but I do believe today we know more than what we did 10 years ago, and I think in 10 years we're going to find out more about why certain cancers develop in certain people while it doesn't develop in others.
I am fascinated with the study of epigenetics because for someone like me, my father and my sister both died of lung cancer. My brother died of leukemia. So on the surface, if I was just thinking about my genes, my genetics, I could very easily go down the rabbit hole of saying cancer's my destiny. But in learning about epigenetics, lifestyle, some of the things that we have control over, that gives me hope. What are your thoughts on that? How much do you think we have control over, and not blaming, but how much do you think we have influence over whether or not we get cancer?
Look, we have a lot of influence. We dictate how we live our lifestyle. Nobody is going to really hold a gun to our head and say, you must smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day. I hope not, at least. But that's the reality. So we make certain decisions in life. Nobody is forcing me to go in a tanning bed salon for 2 hours, for example. And unfortunately, though, sometimes, despite the fact that you could live the healthiest of lifestyle, certain things occur as we get older because there are times where we, just like I told you, we don't know the reason why the DNA or the cells are damaged and they continue to grow in an uncontrollable fashion. I think what you alluded to, though, is very important. How much of the cancer is passed on in families, the hereditary type of component? The minority of cancers actually are transmitted from the parents to the kids and so on. So I usually have, about, the teaching comment, I say between 10 to 12% of cancers are hereditary. What that means is there's a particular gene that is affected in the parents, let's say, and it gets passed on to the kids. So the kids now have that gene that makes them prone to developing particular cancers. But that's not always the case. One of the most common questions I get, as an example, you see a patient and the patient says, well, no one in my family has cancer. Why did I get cancer? And you must explain that because you don't have the hereditary type of cancer, you don't have a gene that passed on from your parents or from other family members onto you, you developed cancer because of X, Y, and Z. So the fact that you have 2 family relatives who had lung cancer does not by any stretch of the imagination mean that you are going to get, hopefully not, because I do not know what their lifestyle is, and it doesn't mean that there's a gene that got passed on from your father to you, as an example. In general, whenever there's a person who is concerned about the possibility of having a hereditary component to a disease that may develop, I always recommend that they visit with a genetic counselor Usually the genetic counselor takes a very detailed history. They draw a family tree. They ask about everybody in the family, and they try to understand, is there any pattern, for example, of these people who developed cancers, or is it simply a sporadic thing that just happens because we're detecting it? Everybody, there's no one in this world that does not know someone that has developed cancer. It's just the way it is. And I hope I answered your question without complicating things, because I like simplifying things.
And the reason I asked you, doctor, because like I said, people tend to think that my father had it, well, I'm going to. So, what the heck, I'll just eat what I want, do what I want, because they think that that's their future. But there are things we can do to mitigate the risks.
Yes. I mean, like I said, so there's a hereditary things, right? Mm-hmm. If you were born to a family that has a particular gene that got passed from, one family member to another, unfortunately, you have nothing. It wasn't your fault. It just what happened, and there are certain things that you could do to screen yourself and make sure that this doesn't happen. An example of this, and I mentioned that in the book, the BRCA1 or the BRCA2 mutation, right? So the BRCA1 mutation happens in a subset of women that could be at a higher risk of developing breast cancer. So if you're born into and the mother has this BRCA1 mutation and develop breast cancer, it's something that you may want to get tested for to know if you are at risk as well, and things of that nature. But that usually should happen under the supervision of a high-risk clinic or a genetic counselor that can really determine if testing is appropriate for the person or not.
When a person receives a cancer diagnosis, is it a good idea to get a second or even a third opinion?
Always. It's actually one of my pet peeves, Joan. In fact, there's an entire chapter in my book called Second Opinions. In my practice, I have always finished my visit with every new patient, literally telling them, look, if you want to get a second opinion, that is totally fine. And I can help you in getting that second opinion. Don't worry about it. It is totally common. It's totally fine. And let me tell you who I would see for a second opinion if I were in your shoes. Take the I would say the difficulty that they are, because patients, they are worried they may hurt your feeling. They're in the room and they're nervous. Well, if I tell him I'm going to get a second opinion, he's going to be mad. He's going to be insulted. He's going to blah, blah, blah. And that should never be the case. If a physician, and I feel strongly about this, if a physician feels that your second opinion is not something you should do, you should find a different physician. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong in getting a second opinion, and your physician should embrace that. When you go to buy a car, you go to a couple of dealers.
Right.
And you check, this is your health. This is your life. Why not get a second opinion? And in the chapter of second opinion, by the way, I go over why people get a second opinion. So you see physician number one, and you go to the second one, and let's say they have exactly the same opinion. You're relieved. You're reassured. You realize, you know what? I'm on the right track. Then you probably go with the one that you feel more comfortable with. Maybe there's a different option that your other physician was not aware of, and maybe you want to explore that. Maybe you want to learn about that. So patients seek second opinions for many reasons, and I'm a big proponent of that, and I recommend it for everyone. You have to be comfortable with your team that is going to take care of you.
You mentioned earlier that when a patient receives a diagnosis, they go into this state of fear. And I'm sure that when you say those words to someone, they stop listening to you. They don't even hear what you're saying after that. So how important is it to bring someone to advocate for you? I remember when my dad had cancer, and every time we went to his oncology appointment, I went in with a list of questions, and it got to the point where the doctor said, give me your list, Joan, and we'll go through each point one by one. How important do you believe it is for a patient to do that?
A lot. I cannot really underestimate that. And I cover that hopefully in the first oncology visit chapter. Two things, just to comment on what you said, John. Number one, I cannot tell you how overwhelming this is for anyone. I've seen it in my patients, in the family members I've cared for. We're not robots, we're human beings. How could you not be overwhelmed with something that really shocked you and it's going to really affect everything that you do in life? So you may not hear everything. You may not be able to really comprehend everything and absorb everything being told to you. Bringing somebody with you, could be a spouse, a partner, a trusted friend, a neighbor, a child, a grandchild, but somebody else that is basically what you're bringing is another set of ears. And that person is going to take notes and may actually catch certain things being told to you that you probably missed because you're wandering around, you're thinking, you're spacing, because that's really what happens. So that is very, very important. I also actually tell patients in the book, it is okay to tape the conversation. I have had many scenarios. Just ask permission. That's really all. I mean, nobody wants to be taped unknowingly, right? I mean, it feels like it just brings the opposite emotions if somebody is taping me without telling me. But there's no reason why you can't tape and listen to the conversation later, or even send it to a family member that was unable to make it. I once had a patient that would actually literally, I think I mentioned this in the book, they recorded me when I was examining their dad, because they had a son in California. He couldn't come to all of the visits, and I welcomed that. We speak to the camera and say hi to the son and all of this. It creates an element of trust. It creates an element of partnership and a teamwork. Also, it is okay. You have to write these type of questions. Like you said, John, that list should be there. And I think the list would change the more visits you have. So your first visit, obviously, you have a lot of questions. I try to simplify those, and I wrote some of the questions I think they should be asked. But maybe there are other questions that I did not write that may be relevant to you. With subsequent visits, sometimes the doctor is not going to have time to answer all of the questions. I mean, if you're going to have 20, 30 questions each time, it may be very difficult to do. So oftentimes, I would tell, at least what I have done, I've told patients in the follow-up visits, you have a lot of questions. Give me the top 3 or 4 that you want me to address today, and let me call you to address the remainder of the questions because other people are waiting. And patients appreciate that. We address the 3, 4 that are burning questions in their head. I finish my clinic, I call them in the evening and say, okay, let's just go over the rest that I was not able to cover early on in the day.
Doctor, what do you believe are some of the things that a person can do to have the best possible outcome?
I think it starts with assembling the right team. And I actually do advocate trusting your intuition and your instincts. So once you are referred to the physician and their team, are you comfortable with this team? Is the physician knowledgeable? Are they available? Do they have a system where if you need something on a Saturday night or Sunday, they're going to actually be available to you? Are you comfortable with the nurses, with the office staff? Because these are all going to be part of your team. The physician is just one person, but there are other folks that will be involved in your care. So assembling the right team is very important. Number 2 is get educated. There's nothing wrong with learning more. Honestly, this book that you mentioned that took me 3 years to write was really to educate people and to have a resource. So learn as much as possible, but always verify the sources that you are trying to get the information from. Because you and I know there's so much on the internet, and a lot of people can post anything they want. Nothing needs to be verified. So, trust but verify. If you have something, you read something, bring it to the attention of your nurse and doctor or pharmacist and say, I read this. Is this real, not real? What do you think about it? So be educated, trust the right team, pick the right team, and have a positive outlook and positive thinking. I believe in mental power. I think it's very important to have the mental perseverance and tenacity and just being strong mentally, because there will be some bumps along the road. It's not going to be smooth. There will be some times where things are not rocky, and you just have to trust the process and trust the team, but be positive, have that positive outlook. And I think these 3 things would probably make a difference in how you actually go through that journey.
Doctor, do you think we will ever see cancer cured?
We have cured many cancers. I mean, there are many cancers that we have cured. And the reason it's a tough question to answer, Joan, is because, as I mentioned earlier, each cancer is different because it depends on the organ it started from. So breast cancer is different than ovarian cancer, than prostate cancer, and so on. And also, the reason why these cancers develop differ between cancers. So there is no such a thing as can we cure cancer in general. It's really more, can we cure breast cancer? Can we cure pancreas cancer? And so on. Each one is very different. The one thing I would say, very reassuring statistic, and it's really important, we have made so much progress that many cancers are becoming chronic diseases. What do I mean by that? We don't really cure hypertension, frankly, high blood pressure. People take medications for the high blood pressure. Essentially, most commonly, we don't really cure diabetes unless we end up doing a transplant to the pancreas. But people take pills or insulin or things like that. And people live as long as they monitor everything and all of this. So we are transforming many cancers into chronic diseases where people are able to live good quality life for a long time with their cancer in check. If you look at the statistics, close to 2 million people are diagnosed with cancer annually in the United States. About 1.9, but let's say close to 2 million. Out of these newly diagnosed people, close to 70%, about 66 or 67%, are alive and well at 5 years from their diagnosis. This was never the case before, Joan. So we clearly have done a great job. We've made progress. We understand the disease. We cure a lot of these cancers. Most women with breast cancer are cured when they get diagnosed. Most people with colon cancer, when they get diagnosed, they're cured if they're diagnosed at early stages. So the key is have a good team. Try to be vigilant if something might develop in your body. Be attuned to it so we can detect things earlier. And again, stay positive. The statistics don't lie. We have made a lot of progress. In the book, I talk about a lot of newer therapies. I bring the stories. I'm a storyteller. Mm-hmm. I don't like to write textbooks, and it would be very boring, frankly, to you and everybody else. So I wanted to write stories. I share stories of people, of patients, of people that, people can relate with. Oh, that's a story that actually I'm reading about. And these stories, if anything, will tell you that we are curing more cancers than ever before.
What can family members and friends do to support their loved one, and how important is that community?
It's so important. I've always felt sad and had a lot of questions in my mind when a patient with new cancer comes alone. And I always wondered, what does that mean? Because genuinely, you cannot go through that journey alone. I mean, some people have to, unfortunately, but it is so important to have your support system. Caregivers vary. Some people have, the caregiver, the spouse, the partner, the child, and some people have others like friends and relatives. That community is so important. They are going to pick you up, pick up the pieces when you feel down. They're going to encourage you. But also, they can provide a lending hand and help because we all going to need the help. That help could be complex, could be simple. Sometimes you may need a ride to the doctor's office. Sometimes you may need help just going getting groceries. Sometimes you just need somebody to talk to and just vent and just be upset, and they can be just sitting there and just holding your hand. So you need that support system because, like I said, the journey is filled with bumps. Despite the triumphs, I think there are a lot of bumps, and you need these people. One element that is very critical is understanding that caregivers could go into burnout and fatigue as well, because they feel guilty taking care of themselves, because they feel that doing this is taken away from the patient that deserves all the care that they need. So I dedicate an entire chapter called Caring for the Caregiver, because the caregivers also, I don't want them to go into compassion fatigue or burnout fatigue. and they need to take care of themselves. I've seen a lot of situations where the caregiver was forgotten to the side.
The book is The Cancer Journey, Understanding Diagnosis, Treatment, Recovery, and Prevention. Doctor, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where can they go?
Thank you for asking. I have, they can, obviously, the book is, both books are available anywhere someone gets books. So on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, on my publisher's website, which is Johns Hopkins University Press. And I have a website, www.chadinabhan.com. They can check out all of these things there. As you mentioned, I have my weekly podcast, The Healthcare Unfiltered. It's available everywhere, and I talk about things pertaining to healthcare. I've interviewed caregivers. Actually, I just interviewed a patient and his wife as they go through the journey, and I'm going to air this in a couple of weeks where, what does the journey looks like from the lens of the patient and the caregiver. I'm also on social media, so on Twitter @Chadi Nabhan and on Instagram Chadi_Healthcare Unfiltered. So more than happy to answer any questions if any of your listeners would like to reach out.
And Doctor, in about 30 seconds or less, what is the takeaway? What would you like to leave our listeners with?
The future is bright. They have to be positive. Cancer is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of a journey that hopefully will be extremely successful. Let's take away the myths that cancer is the end, that cancer is going to take away my life, because frankly, the statistics do not support that. Many cancers are curable. The book has so many jewels about newer therapies, newer diagnostics, and how the future looks like. So treat cancer like any other disease that you may have encountered. Think positive, proceed with the right team, and hopefully we all going to emerge much better on the other side. And I really want to make sure that folks understand, have a positive outlook, because there's a lot to celebrate. There's a lot that we can be proud of, and hopefully this will help everybody involved in this disease.
Dr. Nabhan, thank you so much for joining us. With cancer impacting so many people, I think that this is a really important conversation to be having, and I'm really happy that you were here to have it with me.
Thank you so much for having me on board. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you found the show informative. At Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life, we believe that knowledge is power. Take what you've learned, apply it, and live your best life now. Remember that the information provided is the opinion of our guest and should never replace the advice of a professional who knows your personal situation. If you'd like more information, visit our website, cyacyl.com. That stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on the site, listen to past shows on demand, read our digital articles, and be sure to subscribe to our mailing list. Until next time, this is Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in.